For my biology role model project, I researched Evelyn Gaiser. Gaiser got her Bachelor's of Science in the Department of Biology from Kent State University, then went on to get her Master's from Iowa State University from the Department of Animal Ecology. She then got her PhD from the University of Georgia in the Institute of Ecology. She's now a professor and researcher at Florida International University. One super cool thing that Gaiser does is that she creates music that expresses science. Gaiser thinks that exploring data through music is super important because it helps a lot of people understand science and scientific data better. In her TED Talk, Lakes Write Music, Science is Listening, she shares a piece of music that she created by making an interpretation of 3 years of changes in water temperature of a lake that she studied called Lake Annie. The music is really interesting to hear. She brought a team of student musicians from the university that she works at FIU, to present the song live at the TED Talk. So why is her work admirable? I think it's super important for people to be aware of how climate change is impacting our planet because it's a current issue. Gaiser is doing what she thinks is important by studying how algae could act as a warning of how climate change is impacting our aquatic ecosystems, and then how we could use that information to protect our environments. I really admire this about her because she's taking action and leading research into something she's passionate about, which is also something I'm passionate about, and it's very important to our modern day world, not just to our generation, but to future generations as well. Evelyn Gaiser is involved in ecology, specifically aquatic ecology. She's mainly focused on how algae can be used as a sentinel or a warning for the long-term effects of climate change and land use in aquatic ecosystems, how algae regulates ecosystems, and then how changes in the number of algae species could be helpful to determine sources of environmental change. The most recent paper that Gaiser is an author on is a publication called Cyclical Browning in a Subtropical Lake Inferred from Diatom Records. Gaiser and her fellow researchers found that climate change and land use were changing amounts of colored dissolved organic carbon, or CDOC, in lakes. An increase in CDOC would reduce water transparency, creating browning and changes in the properties of the lake. The purpose of this study was to determine what was causing the change in CDOC so that they could gain some understanding of the consequences of climate change on lake ecosystems and determine what was needed to protect the lakes. So here's a figure from the research. It's just a summary of different things that they found in the lakes throughout some years. I'll go back to this after I describe the techniques. So the research team analyzed sets of monthly and annual data that covered different conditions in Lake Annie, which is the lake that they performed their research on, like properties of the lake, weather patterns, and then changes in diatom assemblages, which are photosynthesizing algae that can be found in lakes. They also examined sediment composition and diatom data that spanned 166 centimeters in depth, which dated all the way back 4 centuries, until the current years of monitoring data, which is in the top 35 centimeters of sediment. These analyses were used to identify the main drivers which had the most significant influence on changes in diatom assemblages over time. So back to the figure, all the way over here is back to 1630 to 1800. So it's important to know that they were looking at 2 types of diatom abundances in this, planktonic and tychoplanktonic. In column 1 here, this phase had low planktonic abundances, and it was the end of the long, stable phase. The lake was clear, acidic, and it was low in plant nutrients. In the next one here, the main thing in this phase was that the lake was clear, but the acidity of the lake had increased due to an increase in acidic rain that started in 1900. In our third column, construction and creation of ditches had increased, which may have related to an increase in carbon and nutrients and an increase in planktonic diatoms. Lake Annie was still acidic and clear, but transparency did begin to slowly decline. In our fourth column, tychoplanktonic diatoms were decreasing because light availability was decreasing because there was more carbon in the lake. Tychoplanktonic diatoms could not get the nutrients they needed, whereas phytoplanktonic diatoms could. In this column here, there was a high abundance of planktonic diatoms, and diatom diversity began to decrease. There were lower carbon and nutrient rates because there were more droughts and less intense rain in Florida at this time. The lake was decreasing transparency at the end of this phase. Then on our final column, the stage had the highest carbon and nutrients accumulation and lowest diatom diversity. The stage had many major weather events, including hurricanes that created high water levels and runoff into lakes. These events increase materials in the lake and create thermal layers, which lead to reduced nutrients and lead to poor water quality. So, in conclusion, they determined that lower transparency due to more CDOC was the main reason that there was a shift from tychoplanktonic to planktonic diatom assemblages. Lower light availability reduces the light that goes through to the lake bottom, which would reduce the amount of phytoplankton that can access the needed nutrients. Evelyn Gaiser has mainly researched how algae can be used as a sentinel for climate change and land use changes. She's still working on research, and she wants to continue working on algae to help understand sources of environmental change and discover ways to put preventative and restorative measures in place to combat long-term effects of climate change. Part of what makes Gaiser a good scientist is that she's passionate about her work, and it's super important for scientists to do work that they're interested in and what they believe is important. Gaiser's work is especially important because climate change is a current problem in our world, and it's important we do what we can to prevent it. Her research in using algae as a sentinel for climate change is one way she's contributing what she can. Gaiser also wants other people to be able to understand and learn science, and has created work that lets people interpret scientific data through music, which is a super cool way that people may better be able to understand and appreciate science.